I want you to think back to your childhood. Can you remember a time in your life where you missed a class, came back the next day, and were completely lost? You ever have that experience? Maybe you're one of those students who had perfect attendance, K through 12. That's awesome. So you have no idea what I'm talking about. I notice this often in my math classes that I would teach at the public high school. My students would miss a day, they would come back, and the first thing they said to me when they came back was, "What'd I miss?" Well, a lot. We were here together for 50 minutes all together yesterday, so I can't summarize that in the next 5 seconds before class starts. They missed out, and because they missed out, they weren't on board. Maybe you've had that experience before. If you took a math class, maybe you didn't miss a day, but you looked out the window. It's a rookie mistake. You look out the window, you look back, and what happens? Now they're speaking Swahili. You have no idea what's going on. You can sort of begin to comprehend what it would have been like for Thomas to be out on the night of Jesus' resurrection. Do you remember what happened? Jesus appeared to the apostles in the locked upper room. Thomas wasn't there. We saw that last week. Can you imagine what it would have been like to be him? He comes back in, and all the apostles, they're all excited. "Thomas, you won't believe it. We saw the Lord. He raised from the dead." And if you know anything about Thomas, he's a skeptic. Really, you guys have been locked in this room too long. When was the last time you guys even went out anywhere? When was the last time you ate or took care of yourself? He begins to question them. He's doubting what they're saying. How do you know Jesus rose from the dead? Could you imagine what they might say to him as the evidence? Well, he showed us what? His hands and his side. Remember, that's what it said. He showed them, "I am Jesus. Look at my hands. You can see how I was pierced. Look at my side. You can see where the spear went in." Thomas refuses to believe. You remember what he says? He says, "Okay, if I see it, I have to feel it too. You guys, you saw it, and you said you really thought he was there. I won't believe unless I feel." Do you understand what he's saying? He's saying, I need tangible evidence. I need to actually be able to feel the person of Jesus Christ. What he's questioning was whether they either were hallucinating or just saw a spirit. Do you get that? He's not necessarily saying you guys lied. He's either thinking they all had mass hallucination. You guys all saw somebody because you're hysterical because Jesus died. Or you just saw a ghost. You saw Jesus' ghost. You don't know it was actually his body. So if he comes back, I'm going to show you guys he didn't really raise from the dead. I'll go and try to touch him, and you're going to see what's going to happen. It's not going to be real. Because Thomas misses out, he's not on the same page as everybody else. He's behind. And what Jesus does is Jesus meets him where he's at, reprimands him, and teaches him what true faith is. Look at the passage here. This is John 20, beginning in verse 24. "But Thomas, called Twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples were telling him, 'We've seen the Lord.' But he said to them, 'If I don't see the mark of the nails in his hand, or put my finger in the mark of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will never believe.' A week later, his disciples were indoors again, and Thomas was with them. Even though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, 'Peace be with you.' Then he said to Thomas, 'Put your finger here and look at my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Don't be faithless, but believe.' Thomas responded to him, 'My Lord and my God.' Jesus said, 'Because you've seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe.' Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." John writes this in part so that we won't fall into the same trap as Thomas. We're meant to learn from his mistake, not emulate it. And his mistake is believing that he needs to have evidence in order to believe. And he gets to list that evidence. He gets to dictate that evidence to God. "God, if you give me this, then I will believe in you." And so what does John let us know Jesus said? "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." There's a blessing that God gives to those who've not seen. Now understand, John is writing many years after Jesus has raised from the dead. most likely about 70 AD. It's been about 40 years since Jesus rose from the dead. And what that means is many of the eyewitnesses at this point have been martyred. Many of those who witnessed Jesus' resurrection are no longer alive. And it would be easy for the people that John is writing to believe, well, if we had been there, we'd have a stronger faith. If we could have just witnessed it, then we would be more solid. We'd have more confidence. And John writes so that we'll understand today, as those who are not eyewitnesses of the resurrection, we have what we need. We have what we need. What do we have? We have the blessing of belief. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. You see, what John is showing us here in his gospel is that belief is a gift. For by grace you've been saved through faith. It is a gift of God. The faith that you have, the ability to believe, has been given to you from God on high. John wrote his gospel so that we might live by that faith. He wants us to understand about that faith, but then he wants us to live by that faith. And I've given you a definition in the Gospel of John for faith. He presents faith as our depending upon God and not ourselves. I've said, define faith as abject dependence. You stop trying to save yourself. You stop trying to sanctify yourself. You stop trying to live for yourself. And you live in abject dependence upon him. There's 3 lessons that I want to show you in John 20, 24 through 31. Just going to pull 3 lessons here out of the text that I think John is teaching us through the story and through his summary. The very first lesson, I'm going to title it, The Test of Faith. The first lesson I want you to see is the test of faith. Look at verse 27. Look at John 20 and verse 27. And I want you to focus specifically on Jesus' reprimand of Thomas. Notice how Jesus reprimands Thomas here. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here and look at my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Don't be faithless, but believe. I want you to notice the reprimand there at the end. You see that last sentence? Don't be faithless, but believe. Look at that word faithless right there. That word faithless. The word faithless is an adjective. It's the Greek word apistos. Apistos. And what he does right here is he says apistos, and then he says, but believe. What's belief? It's the opposite of apistos. What is it? Pistos. These are opposites. They're antonyms. You have faith. You have not faith. Do you get that? When you add that prefix "a" to the front of a word, you see the "a" there at the front of that word? You add that prefix "a," it means without or not. So he's saying, do not be without faith, be with faith. Stop living without faith and start living with faith. What Jesus is doing here is he's explaining to Thomas, Thomas, your problem is not that you needed evidence. Your problem is you're not walking in faith. He's meeting Thomas here to reprimand Thomas for his unbelief. I often thought, when I've read this before, and actually I've read it differently this time, I'm teaching it differently than I've taught it before. I always thought that when I read this, he's meeting Thomas where he's at. He's giving him the evidence he needs. And I always sort of glossed over the reprimand. Jesus isn't meeting Thomas where he's at. He's reprimanding him for where he's at. Do you get that? He's saying, stop that. Stop your unbelief. Don't be faithless, but believe. Now, you need to be careful here, because it's easy then to think that belief means you throw your skepticism out the window. Just believe. And that's actually what the world means when they say the word faith. If the world says faith, what they're talking about is a blind leap into darkness. You don't know if anything's there. Hopefully something is. You're going to jump. Hopefully something catches you. It's a wish upon a star. That's what the world means when they use the word faith. That's not what we're talking about. But there's a proper sort of skepticism that believers are meant to have. That skepticism is modeled by the Bereans in Acts. Do you remember the Bereans, how they responded when they heard Paul preaching the word? It says this is the testimony about the Bereans in Acts 17:11. The people here, it's talking about Berea, were of more noble character than those in Thessalonica, since they received the word with eagerness and examined the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. Consequently, many of them believed, including a number of prominent Greek women as well as men. You see that word believe right there. Pisteuo. Many of them believed. Why? They did two things. They received the word of God with eagerness. They weren't receiving it and saying, we don't want to hear this, we don't want to pay attention to this, we don't have time for this. They were saying, we want to hear this, we want to pay attention, we want to focus, we're going to listen to this. This message, we're going to receive it with eagerness. But then here's what they did secondly. They searched the scriptures to see if it's so. Is Paul sound in his reasoning? Does what he is saying, this book says, line up with this book? Or is he simply taking verses, deleting the context, and making them say whatever he wants? And so the Bereans would listen to Paul, they would hear everything he quoted, and then they would go and they'd look at the Bible. And they'd figure out, is that true? Is that really what it says? You're supposed to do that. And then what does it say? Consequently. You see that word consequently? Many of them believed. There is a place for healthy skepticism, but Thomas has the wrong kind. You see, Thomas' skepticism is based on a philosophy called empiricism. You know what empiricism says? It says truth is determined by your five senses. You can only figure out what is true. You can only gain knowledge or acquire knowledge through your five senses. Do you get that's what Thomas's problem is? Because what does he say? I got to see, I got to feel, and then I'll believe. Thomas is an empiricist. And he thinks that you reach conclusions that lead to faith based on empiricism. That's why Jesus reprimands him. There's a place for healthy skepticism. There's a place for believing with your eyes open. But understand this, that belief is a gift from God. The ability to see the scriptures clearly is a gift from God. The psalmist says, by his light we see light. He enables us to see. How should we respond to skeptics? I love the way that Jude tells us how we should respond to those who are wavering. Jude was a skeptic. He was probably more skeptical than Thomas. Do you remember who Jude is? He's one of Jesus' brothers. What does John's gospel tells us about Jesus' brothers? They didn't believe in him. His own half-brothers, they shared a mother, didn't believe in him. They observed his life, they heard his testimony, and they didn't believe in him. But eventually Jude followed Jesus. Jude and James both are Jesus' brothers who came to faith later on. They were skeptics. Listen to what Jude says we should do when we come across a skeptic. Have mercy on those who waver. Save others by snatching them from the fire. Have mercy on others, but with fear, hating even the garment defiled by the flesh. The word waver right there is the Greek word diakrino. It means a wavering uncertainty. You're like, I don't know if it's this. I'm not sure if it's this. I'm struggling right now. And when you come to somebody and they're struggling, you don't say, knock that off. Get over yourself. It's so easy. Just believe. That's not what you do. What does he say? Gently. And Jesus could have been much different in the way he dealt with Thomas. I think that me and my flesh, my response to somebody like Thomas, I would have, let him know that my body was real. You question my hands? How about a little slap upside the head? Thomas, the disciples all told you they saw me. You're accusing every single one of them of lying. Do you understand what you did, right? I go and I reprimand him. What does Jesus do? He says, hey, come here. Go ahead, feel. Stop your unbelief. Be believing. He reprimands him. He doesn't say, oh, that's okay. You do you. Jesus doesn't say that. Stop your unbelief. Walk in faith. But he meets him where he's at, reprimands him for where he's at, and gets him back on the path of faith. These struggles that Thomas has isn't something new. He's been struggling all along. If you've been paying attention to the character of Thomas in the Gospel of John, you'll notice this empiricism has been manifest before. Do you remember when the disciples were with Jesus in Perea and he said, we're going to go to Bethany. We're going to go because Lazarus has died. And they're like, no, let's not go there. They just tried to kill you. That would be a really bad PR move, Jesus. We shouldn't go where people want to murder you. And Jesus says, we're going. And then Thomas says, okay, let's go. Do you remember how he said it? I love the way he says it. He says it this way in John 11:16. Then Thomas, called Twin, said to his fellow disciples, let's go too so that we may die with him. I don't think he says this courageously. Anytime you read the Bible, you hear it like in your head, you hear a voice. I hear this like Eeyore right here, right? I think, let's go to so that we may die with him. We're all going to die. His empiricism has resulted in a pessimism that cannot be overcome by the reality of who he follows. Do you get that? And we do the same thing, don't we? We can get so blinded by our five senses that we forget, I'm a child of the creator of the universe. I've entered into relationship with divinity. No weapon formed against me shall stand. We forget those things and we, like Thomas, say, well, let's go so we may die with him. Do you remember how he responded when Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you? Amazing news. John 14, Jesus says, I go to prepare a place for you. Listen to Thomas's response. Jesus is speaking. He says, if I go away and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself so that where I am, you may also be. You know the way to where I am going. Lord, Thomas said, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? I would imagine Thomas raised his hand when he said this right here. That's just how I picture him in my head. Do you see what's happening? Do you see what Jesus said? You know the way. Thomas says, wait, I don't. I didn't get that memo. You understand? He can't comprehend spiritual truth because he's trying to use his own empirical methods to determine it. What's he asking for right here? I think he's asking for a map. I think he wants a map. Jesus, where are you going? Can you draw it for me? Here's some paper. Can you show me where we're supposed to go? You know where we're supposed to go. Now, we don't want to totally discount Thomas because Jesus has already affirmed Thomas's faith. In John chapter 6, when all of the disciples leave, only 12 are left, and Jesus says, 11 of you believe in me. One of you is a demon, 11 of you believe in me. Do you remember that? He affirms their faith. He says, you believe in me in John chapter 6. And also in John chapter 6, he told them how they were able to believe. He says this in John 6, verse 63, the Spirit is the one who gives life. The flesh doesn't help at all. The words I have spoken to you are spirit and are life. Remember what he says to Peter? When Peter affirms the identity of Christ, flesh and blood didn't reveal that to you. You did not figure that out with your senses. Your empirical mind did not calculate the mathematics of the Messiah. The Spirit revealed it to you. You cannot understand spiritual truth with fleshly tools. The words I spoke to you are spirit and life. Thomas gets it. Thomas understands this. That's why Jesus reprimands him. Because Thomas has forgotten that spiritual truths are taught to him by the Spirit. John writes his gospel so that we might live by faith. The first test I shared with you is the test of faith. Second lesson is the cry of faith. Look back at the passage there. Look how Thomas responds to Jesus reprimanding him. Stop being faithless, but believe. What does Thomas do? Doesn't argue. Doesn't say, but Jesus, I haven't felt your body yet. I need to experience it with my senses. Doesn't do that. What does he do? Look at the passage. Thomas responded to him, my Lord and my God. That's the cry of faith. Both of those things must be confessed for anyone who will be saved. Now, understand what Thomas is saying. He's referring to Jesus both as his Lord, that means his master. That means Thomas is saying, I'm your slave. That's the cry of abject dependence. I will not do anything against you. I will not do anything apart from you. I will walk in obedience to you. What you tell me to do, that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to live for. And you're my God. I recognize who you are. You're not just a man. You're God, very God. John has included all throughout his gospel that Jesus is God. If you do not believe what Thomas says right here, you cannot be saved. Why not? Because you're not believing in Jesus. Jesus is God. If you're believing in a Jesus who's not God, you're not believing in Jesus Christ. Either Jesus is God or he was a lunatic or a legend or a liar. We believe those who follow Jesus Christ, that he is who he said he was. He is God. And John has been making this argument throughout his gospel. Let me show you 3 verses. And if you have those people who knock on your door who try to convince you that Jesus is not God, you might want to write down these references. First one is John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's pretty clear. Jesus Christ is the Word. Who does it say the Word is? The Word was God. How is it that people can't get that? How can they read that and not comprehend that? It seems so obvious. It's saying that Jesus is God. It's because they're trying to use their senses to figure it out. And in my senses, this doesn't equal this. How do I make that happen? It's not based on fleshly understanding. This is spiritual reality. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are 3 persons. They're one God. I can't show you the math for that. I can show you the math for other things, but not for that. How do I know it's true? Because he's given me the gift of sight. He's given me the gift of faith where I can recognize that. And John repeats it again in verse 18. No one has seen God, the one and only Son who is himself God and is at the Father's side. He has revealed him. Here's some basic logic for you. If it says it, it's either true or it's a lie. He is himself God. Do you see that? So either the Bible is telling lies or it's telling the truth. That's logic. And you need to understand this, that when we come to faith in Jesus Christ, we're not throwing logic out the window. As a matter of fact, our logic is healed. Reprobate minds don't have logic. Spiritual truth is logical. It's sequential. It works in if-then conclusions. But you can't see it with a mind that's been subject to decay, to futility, to entropy. It falls apart. It can't comprehend. It can't see. Why? Because it's subjected to blindness and hardness of heart. John repeats it in his epistle. In 1 John 5:20, he says this, we know the Son of God has come and has given us understanding so that we may know the true one. We are in the true one, that is his Son, Jesus Christ. He is the true God and eternal life. He is the true God. You see that pronoun he right there? What's the definite antecedent? Jesus Christ. He's talking about Jesus. He is the true God and eternal life. This is what Thomas cries out. This is the cry of faith. And Jesus gets him there by reminding him, stop your unbelief. Walk in abject dependence. Depend on me. Stop depending on your senses. Stop depending on your empiricism to come to faith and depend upon me. And he cries out, my Lord and my God. Verse 29, Jesus replies, because you've seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. Do you see what Jesus is saying here? Thomas, I gave this to you, but you didn't need it. And Thomas actually shows he doesn't need it by his response. Because does he do what he said he needed? Unless I put my finger in. Unless I reach my hand in. Does he do that? No, he demonstrates he doesn't need what he thought he needed. But then Jesus lets us know. You have the blessing of believing without seeing. What Jesus is letting us know, and what he's letting his disciples know, is that seeing does not equal believing. You get that? That's what the world says. Seeing is believing. That's not how it works. Believing is seeing. You follow me? The transitive property doesn't work there. The reflexive property doesn't work. Sorry. If you like all your math to work nicely. It doesn't work for this statement. Seeing is not believing. Believing is seeing. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the message of the Gospel of John. Throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus has been teaching, you see me because you believe the Word. You recognize me because you believe God. You see because you believe. Do you get that? Do you remember what he said to Martha? At the graveside of her brother, right before he raised him up from the dead? Let me point it out to you. Please pay attention to the sequence. Jesus said to her, didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? If you believed, then what? You would see the glory of God. You see the if-then there. If you believe. then you would see the glory of God. If you believe that Jesus is God, then you're going to recognize God's glory is in front of you. And he's so glorious that he can, with a word, raise the dead. Lazarus, come forth. And it happens. And God's glory is seen. But not for everybody who's standing there, because some of them go and they tattle on Jesus for raising the dead. So he can go to prison. Not all see that glory. By means of his light, we see light. The gift of faith results in the gift of seeing. This is what Hebrews 11 tells us when it defines faith. Now, faith is the reality of what is hoped for, the proof of what is not seen. You haven't seen it yet. He gives you the gift of faith. Faith precedes seeing. John is writing so we can have an eyewitness testimony and we come to true faith by receiving with meekness the implanted word. God gives us that gift so we can recognize him. This has been taught throughout the Gospel of John, that belief precedes sight. Jesus taught this to the royal official in Capernaum in John chapter 4. Do you remember that story? Jesus comes into Capernaum and this royal official comes and his son is dying and he begs Jesus to come and heal his son. Let me read it to you. John 4:48. Jesus told him, "Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will not believe." Understand, Jesus is not saying, here's a prescription for belief. He's indicting them for their unbelief. You get the difference? He's not saying this is okay. He's saying this is unacceptable. Unless you see signs and wonders, you're not going to believe. And he's coming out of Samaria, where hundreds have believed at him at his word alone. He doesn't work a single miracle in Samaria. Do you remember that? Woman at the well. Then the people come and they say, now we believe because we heard your words. Not because we saw a sign. Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will not believe. Verse 49, Sir, the official said to him, come down before my boy dies. Can you hear the desperation? My boy is dying. I don't want a theological treaty. I want you to save my son. Please come to him. Do you see what's wrong with his understanding? He thinks Jesus needs to be there. He thinks Jesus needs to come and do something. He thinks he needs to see Jesus do something, and then his son is going to be healed. And Jesus corrects him. And he responds appropriately. Go, Jesus told him, your son will live. The man believed what Jesus said to him and departed. That's faith. He didn't say, but no, you have to be there. He goes, he believes. Jesus said it's going to happen. Jesus never tells a lie. And he goes and he finds his son healed in that very hour. He didn't need to see a sign to believe. He needed to believe Jesus. He needed to believe his word. Do you understand? This is why John gives us the whole extended account in chapter 9 of the man born blind. You understand? Right in the middle of his book, he's going to say, okay, let's stop and let's talk about faith. There was a man who was born blind, and he tells us the whole story. Let me show you the very end of that. Jesus says this, John 9:39, Jesus said, I came into this world for judgment in order that those who do not see will see, and those who do see will become blind. Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and asked him, we aren't blind too, are we? If you were blind, Jesus told them, you wouldn't have sin. But now you say, we see, your sin remains. I want you to try to understand this for a second. Understand what Jesus is saying. The reason their sin remains is because they say, we have it figured out. We see clearly. We are depending upon ourselves for sight. And because they're depending upon themselves for sight, they're staying in their sins. You see, what has to happen for you to get saved, you have to say, wait, I can't see anything. I can't see. I'm blind. Jesus says it this way in Revelation, you have to admit you're naked, poor, pitiable, blind. And you come to Jesus to receive salve that you might see. That's what Jesus does with the blind man. What does he do? He makes mud. He anoints his eyes. Blind man doesn't see something that saves him. He believes Jesus, receives his sight. See, they remain in their sin. Why? Because they're refusing to admit their need. They're refusing to admit that they are blind, and they could see it clearly, if they simply read the Old Testament. Because over and over again, the Jews are reprimanded for their blindness and their hard hearts. What do you do when you realize you're blind and you're hard-hearted? You cry out for help. And you know what Jesus will do? He'll give you eyes to see. He'll give you a heart to understand. If you want it, he will give it to you. If you admit your need. Why did they not do that? John explains it in John 12. Verse 37, even though he had performed so many signs in their presence, they did not believe in him. This was to fulfill the word of Isaiah the prophet, who said, Lord, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? This is why they were unable to believe, because Isaiah also said, he has blinded their eyes, hardened their hearts, so they would not see with their eyes or understand with their hearts and turn, and I would heal them. Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke about him. You see what Isaiah says? And this is written down for every Jew to hear as it's read in their synagogue from week to week. You're blind. You can't see. You can do nothing to save yourself. You need me. You need help. There's two ways you can respond to that. Listen to John 15:24. If I had not done the works among them that no one else had done, they would not have sinned. Now they have seen and hated both me and my Father. Do you understand their sin? They see the signs. They see that the divine rescuer has come. The Messiah, the anointed one, is there. And instead of going to him for help and admitting their blindness and admitting their hard hearts and saying, we need a transplant, we need new eyes, we need a new heart, they stand far off. And they say, we see, we understand, we don't need you, Jesus. Their hard hearts refuse to come to him. They hated him and the Father. You can either respond to Jesus with hate or with love. And if you love him, you come to him and you say, help. I need you. I need you to rescue me. I need you to deliver me. You admit your blindness and he will give you sight. You admit your hard-heartedness and he will transform your heart. It's his good pleasure. You cry out. And all who cry, all who call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. John writes this gospel so we might live by faith. The first lesson he gives us is a test of faith. The second lesson we have here is the cry of faith. And the last one I want to point out to you is the life of faith. Listen to John 20:30 and 31. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. I want you to listen to this passage here because it's the thesis of the entire book. John says, I could keep on writing. He only gives us 7 signs in his gospel. And he says, that's what you need. That's what you need. In chapter 21, he lets us know that the books could not contain all the miracles Jesus did. So there's not enough paper on the earth to contain all the miracles that Jesus did in his 3 years of public ministry. He couldn't write it all down. It's too much. Here's what you got. And this is what you need. This is what you need to believe. Now, the purpose of his book is twofold. Look at verse 31 right there. See the twofold purpose. 2 things he wants us to do in response. First, believe. Believe what? Believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. The Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one, the prophesied Savior of the world has come. Son of God. Not just a man, but God, very God. As Thomas has just now espoused in his confession, my Lord and my God. But then secondly, we don't stop there. You see, the problem with stopping there is you just got on the level of the demons. Understand this. The demons know exactly who Jesus Christ is. Do you notice that throughout the Gospels as you read them? How do the demons respond? Get away from me. Have you come to torment me? Had to punish me before my time? They know who he is. What does James say about that? They know that God is one, and they tremble. Demons understand the Trinity, and they tremble. If you just read the first half of John 20:31, you're not saved. That's demonic faith. That's mental assent. That's knowing certain things are true. But that by believing you might have life in his name. Do you see that? Because if you don't go there, you haven't moved on to saving faith. You know it's true. You know he is who he said he was. And then you live in abject dependence upon him. The life that you receive from him is manifest in the works you do. What that means to have life in his name, it means because you believe he is who he said he was, you believe he can do what he said he would do. And so in those moments when you are struggling to obey, and he promised to never leave you or forsake you, you know he's going to sustain you. In those moments when you're struggling with fear, and you know he said, I have not given you a spirit of fear, but of power and love and self-control, you stop, you pause, and you say, Lord, I know who you are. I know whom I have believed in. And this fear is not from you. And so I ask you to remove it from my heart and to give me that spirit of love and power and self-control. And I'm going to walk in dependence upon your words, your promises. And I know by your Spirit, you'll make those a reality in my life. This is what Jesus is talking about when he says, I am the bread that came down from heaven. Not like the bread that your fathers ate in the wilderness. They ate it, and then what happened? They died. This bread, this heavenly bread, you eat it and you receive life. You believe in him so that you might live by his name. Listen to John 6. John 6:35. I am the bread of life, Jesus told them. No one who comes to me will ever be hungry, and no one who believes in me will ever be thirsty again. But as I told you, you've seen me, and yet you do not believe. Do you see what Jesus is saying? He's saying, I'm standing in front of you. I am the bread of life. And you refuse to come to me. You refuse to admit your need. You see, that's the first step of faith. That's why I say abject dependence. Abject because we can do nothing. I can't do anything. I am in desperate need of help. Every moment, all the time, every day. And help is available every moment, all the time, every day. And I enter into that help when I receive that sustenance for my soul. I have in him what I need to be sustained through this trial right now. If I depend upon him completely, I'll never be hungry. I'll never thirst again. He says this in verse 57, just as the living Father sent me and I live because of the Father, so the one who feeds on me will live because of me. So it means to have life in his name. It means we live because of him. Because he conquered, we're alive. Because his Spirit indwells us, we're alive. We live because of him. That's the life of faith. The reason I'm here, the reason I'm alive, the reason I'm drawing breath is because it's all about Jesus. Because it's all for him. It's all from him, it's all to him, it's all by him. The life of faith is a life that feasts on the bread of life. He gives me what I need. He sustains me. We have this problem though. Life comes at us at 100 miles an hour and we forget what we have. We forget about that bread of life. And that's one of the reasons that Jesus gave us communion. He gave it to us because he said, you guys are forgetful. I like the way that Paul Tripp describes it, gospel amnesia. We forget what he's done. We forget the good news. We forget who we are. And we need a reminder. And so he says, stop, pause, and remember me. And what do we have in him? Everything that we need. We're going to pause here at the end of our service and we're going to partake of communion to remind ourselves that in him we have life. That we believe in his name and we have life in his name. How? Because we're feasting on the bread of life. Let me point out the words of Jesus in 1 Corinthians 11:24. This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Do you understand what he's saying right there? What you need, I have. Will you admit that need? Will you come to me to be sustained? Will you let go of your skepticism? I don't know if he can sustain me. I don't know if he has enough for me. I don't know if he can pull me out of this pit. I don't know if he can rescue me. Drop it. Let it go and receive from him what you need today to be rescued from your sin, to be sustained in your sanctification. He will provide it for you. I'm going to pray for the bread. I'm going to ask the worship team to come back up and the ushers to come forward with the bread. Lord, I thank you for your body broken for us. Lord, you've given us everything that we need for life and godliness. You've given us your sustaining life. And we live like we have to figure it out on our own. We live like we have to find the resources and the strength in ourselves. And you're holding out your hands all day long. Lord, I pray that we would be a dependent people, that we would come to you with mouths open, that we would admit our need, that we'd humble our hearts. Lord, give us eyes to see, and give us soft hearts. Transform us by your word. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.